1,000 greetings, my friends, and welcome to the ultimate guide for novice adventurers. In this course, we're going to cover everything you need to know to get started in the World of Warcraft and take your first steps on a new adventure in Azeroth, shaping you from a fresh adventurer into a death dealer that no one can match. I'm Matt, although more well known within the Warcraft sphere as Ferdy, and I'll be your instructor throughout the course. I'm actually really looking forward to getting into it, as this game is obviously a personal favorite of mine. It's had a huge influence on my life and led me to meet my partner, some of my close friends, and a lot of opportunities and memories that I'll cherish forever. And we're actually getting a new expansion, Battle for Azeroth, in a few weeks, which is pretty cool, and it's going to be a lot of fun for everyone. World of Warcraft is a perennial powerhouse, releasing new content year after year. This game released in 2004, and it's still putting out fresh content every few months for every year since. Believe me when I say there are a few games out there more established. I've been around since the beginning, picking the game up only a few weeks after the release. That's over 13 and a half years of World of Warcraft experience, which has left me with some truly unique memories and the pleasure of playing with some of the game's most successful and renowned organizations, known within World of Warcraft as guilds. I've also climbed my way to the top of the player versus player ladders in several distinct seasons, as I really enjoy achieving mastery in all aspects of the game. In the last 6 years, I started producing a ton of educational content as well, such as written guides for many of the game's most popular sites. I became a verified partner on Twitch TV, and I mostly streamed educational World of Warcraft content, as well as my daily grind and raids with my guilds. The website icyveins.com still hosts many of my guides, and remains the game's most popular resource for class learning. This course is meant to build you from the ground up, from an absolute novice to an adept adventurer that's ready to take on every challenge and facet the game has to offer. By the end of the course, you'll be able to take on the game's hardest enemies with ease, generate sacks of gold, and find the best items in what is inarguably the world's most vast game to date. I've split the course into sections which you can tackle at your leisure. We'll start with the real fundamentals, from the moment of character creation to when you tackle your first dungeon. We're going to learn how to complete the quests and some of the most epic story arcs that any game has on offer. I'll teach you how to team up with other players, fight together in a party, find a guild to call home, and fight together in the player versus player battlegrounds. As we move through the lectures, I'll begin to teach you some of the more advanced tips and tricks that many players don't even know exist. You can always skip forward or backward to match your current experience should you need to. This course is going to help you absorb an otherwise overwhelming amount of information that I've broken down into palatable bite-sized chunks that won't have you feeling out of your depth. I can't wait to get started. Please take a moment to rate the course, as the feedback is very appreciated. Let's jump into our first lecture together.
Remember, 'Remember, our line has always ruled with wisdom. Remember, 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 our line has always rul and strength.
Welcome to the World of Warcraft, adventurers. World of Warcraft is a vast, expansive game experience offering a dizzying variety of activities. This game falls under a genre called massively multiplayer online role-playing games. Yep, it's quite the mouthful, but most of us just call them MMOs. Setting out in an MMO is a little like a classic adventure story. You start out as nothing, and you slowly build yourself into an unstoppable juggernaut that anyone could be proud of. The initial goal in World of Warcraft is just to reach the maximum level, which increases each time the developer releases a new expansion pack. After you've accomplished that, well, that's part of the appeal of World of Warcraft. You get to choose how you spend your time and where your areas of interest lie. Some players like to commit to hunting down the hardest bosses within the game, entering dangerous environments known as dungeons and raids in search of the best items and the greatest challenges. Some players pursue the top of the player versus player leaderboard, taking on other players and teams for rewards and glory. Some like to take control of the trade system, playing the economy and generating profit. Others still hunt down the rarest collectibles and novelty items, adding new trophies to their collections. And the list goes on, and on, and on. There are a massive number of undertakings that can keep you entertained, and part of the joy of the game is discovering what's right for you. Before we get started and get our boots in the ground in World of Warcraft's colossal world called Azeroth, we're going to set you up with a server, a character, and an identity within the game. Let's get to our first activity, choosing the right realm for you. During this activity, we will select a realm for our champion. Realms are the game's servers, and choosing one that fits your goal is vital to your enjoyment of the game. Realms are different instances of the same game world, so while they are all physically identical within the game, your game experience may vary greatly due to factors such as population, realm type, economy, and faction distribution. You can group with players from other realms for certain activities, but many core features of the game require you to be on the same realm as other players, most notably joining a guild with players. There are 4 types of realms available in World of Warcraft. Normal realms, also known as player versus environment or PvE realms, prevent you from engaging players of the opposite faction except under specific circumstances, such as if you enter a hostile enemy city. Player versus player realms allow you to engage enemy players at any time should you come across them. Role-playing realms are hubs for players that wish to participate and increase their immersion within the game via roleplay. RP realms follow the same rules regarding player versus player combat as PvE realms. The final type of realm is role-playing player versus player, which features a hybrid between a standard PvP realm with an emphasis on roleplay. Please note that you are not forced or expected to roleplay on RP and RP PvP realms, but you are unlikely to find players willing to roleplay on other servers. It's time to choose a realm for ourselves. I recommend looking at some statistics as you make your choice. Head to realmpop.com and select your region. You want to consider a few main points. Population. More populous realms have more options for grouping and social interaction, as well as more robust economies. Less busy realms allow you to more easily farm resources or rare monsters, but you may have a hard time obtaining materials from other players or completing certain objectives. For most new players, I recommend choosing a realm marked either high or full. Faction distribution. Most realms do not have an even distribution of Horde and Alliance. Rather, they are typically skewed heavily towards one faction. It is recommended that you choose a realm that has a heavy weighting towards the faction you intend to play. Realm type. You rarely notice any major differences between PvE and PvP realms, due to said faction distribution. However, for realms with more even faction distributions, player versus player realms may be frustrating for some. Finally, if you do intend to experiment with character roleplay, be sure to choose an RP realm. You can have up to 16 characters per realm with the most recent edition of World of Warcraft. You may have characters on as many realms as you like, however, a maximum of 50 characters per account is permitted. Characters can be moved between realms via a paid transfer service known as a realm transfer, available from the in-game shop or on the Battle.net site. Now that you've decided on a realm, it's time to create your first character and take your first steps in the World of Warcraft. As we touched on earlier, there are two playable factions that define your fundamental game experience in the World of Warcraft: the Alliance and the Horde. You may only communicate and party together with players of the same faction, so if you are playing alongside friends, be sure you all agree on a faction before you get started. Your experience in World of Warcraft can be very different depending on your choice of faction. Each faction has completely different questlines and leveling experiences, and certain items are only available as one faction. The game world itself, known as Azeroth, is heavily influenced by these two factions, and many territories within the game fall under the dominion of either the Alliance or the Horde, naturally leading players of either faction to entirely different areas and cities. Most importantly, your choice of faction determines what races you can play. Both the Alliance and the Horde have 6 main playable races each. With the purchase of the new Battle for Azeroth expansion, releasing in August of 2018, 4 new sub-races are being added for each faction, which are essentially visual variants of some of the pre-existing races. There's also one neutral race, the Pandaren, who can choose either faction. Your choice of race determines how your character will look and what classes you will be able to play. For example, the Hulking Tauren race is not allowed to play the Sneaky Rogue class. Every race has a small and unique perk, referred to as a racial ability, or simply racial. For example, human player characters have Diplomacy, which increases the reputation they earn with in-game factions, the Human Spirit, which increases the amount of secondary stats you gain from all sources, and Every Man for Himself, which removes all stuns from the character when activated. Each race starts the game with a unique questline and starting area. There are also 10 home cities, which are the capital cities of the in-game races. No matter which race you decide to play, you will be able to access all of the home cities belonging to your faction. Everyone has seen, played, or read some sort of high fantasy. Whether it's Legolas shooting off arrows with pinpoint precision, or Inigo Montoya exacting revenge for his fallen father, there is a fantasy archetype that resonates with everyone. Choosing a role and a class for your character defines that, outlining the way you will play, the weapons you'll fight with, and how you work with your friends and allies. Let's start with the roles of World of Warcraft. What is a role? What does that mean within the context of the game? To answer that question, remember that World of Warcraft is a game that is meant to be played with others. Roles help diversify the parties you will form to ensure you can tackle all challenges available. It's like having access to rock, paper, and scissors all at once. We'll discuss character classes in a minute, but it's worth noting that only certain classes are capable of playing specific roles. There are 3 main roles in World of Warcraft, forming the trinity for all party play. First, we have damage dealers, the most popular and common role in the game. Damage dealers are called DPS by most players within the game. DPS is an acronym that means damage per second, which is a statistic that damage dealers obviously aim to maximize. DPS make up the majority of parties as well, so despite its popularity as a role, this role is also in high demand. This is an especially good role for new players, as it doesn't require very much knowledge of the core game mechanics to play properly. When you group with other players, your main responsibility as a DPS is to deal as much damage as possible while avoiding enemy attacks. DPS players also have a great quality of life when playing alone, as they can quickly dispatch enemies in succession. Next up, we have tanks. As you might expect from the name, tanks are tough and sturdy, and they can take a lot of hits on the chin before they start to wince. Tank players have special abilities that generate significant amounts of threat, which is one of the game's core mechanics. Non-player enemies will always attack the player that generates the most threat, although we will discuss this in greater detail later on. Tanks serve as the front line within the game, soaking up the majority of enemy damage, protecting their allies, and diverting enemy attacks. Think Sword and Shield archetype. This role is somewhat unfriendly to new players, as tanks are the first players to enter any fight, and they're often expected to lead the group. Tank characters are generally very simple to play, but they do require a good understanding of the environment, the dungeon layouts, and core game mechanics. Typically, a party or group only has 1 or 2 tanks, forming the tip of the spear for the damage dealers and healers to rally behind. Tanks are also great for solo play, as they can kill a large amount of enemies simultaneously, albeit a bit slowly. Finally, we have healers. Healers keep the tanks and the damage dealers alive, using their spells to restore health to their allies, as you might expect. They also have access to a wide variety of useful utility abilities, allowing them to perform unique feats not available to other roles. Healers have a very different playstyle than tanks and DPS, as their role is focused on supporting and saving their allies. Healers have poor quality of life for solo play, as they have few damage spells, making it difficult for them to take on enemies alone. This role is often in very high demand. There are also many unofficial sub-roles within the game. The most commonly referred to sub-roles are distinctions for the different kinds of DPS. Melee DPS and ranged DPS, for instance, or simply melee and ranged. Many players also refer to ranged DPS that deal exclusively magic damage as casters, which is a shortened version of spellcaster DPS. Now that we have a basic understanding of playable roles within the game, it's time to look at the most important part, by far, the classes. There are 12 playable classes in World of Warcraft. Classes are essentially playable fantasy archetypes, and you must choose one before you can create your character. As we noted earlier, your choice of race may limit your playable class options. Your choice of class is permanent, and your character may never change. However, you can always create a new character of a different class to try out some of the different flavors. That said, there's also flavor choice within your class. Let's say you've chosen to play a mage. After the first few levels are out of the way, you're going to be presented with the option to specialize. Become a fire mage and incinerate your foes, or an arcane mage and master the intricacies of time and space. Every class has multiple specializations to offer, and fortunately, you can easily change your specialization anytime you like. So don't fear, there's lots of variety to keep you occupied. There are 2 main types of classes, hybrids and pure DPS. Hybrid classes have a tank or healer specialization, and sometimes both. Pure DPS classes, on the other hand, have exclusively damage-dealing specializations. The playable classes within World of Warcraft are as follows. The Druid. The Druid is a very popular hybrid class, as they have 4 specializations, more than any other class, and they can play any role. Thematically, Druids harness the powers of nature and are deeply in tune with the wild. The Druid is a great class for new players, as it is simple but satisfying and offers the most variety available within the game. Hunter. The Hunter is the most popular class in World of Warcraft. It's a pure DPS class. Hunters are a ranged class, using weapons like bows, guns, and crossbows to deal damage to enemies from afar. Hunters can capture beasts in the wild, able to use them as permanent animal allies to fight alongside. Mage. Mages are another pure DPS class, unleashing the arcane from afar. This class focuses on setting up large bursts of damage using their high mobility to compensate for their fragile nature. If you like the wizard archetype, this class is for you. Monk. Monks are a hybrid class that can play all 3 roles. Monks are kinda like the Kung Fu killers in World of Warcraft, using their fists to deal with their foes. Paladin. Paladins are another hybrid class, and they can play all 3 roles as well. Thematically, Paladins are essentially the Crusaders, champions of the light who combine the power of the sword and hammer with the power of light magic. Priest. The Priest is a ranged hybrid class, capable of serving as a healer or a DPS. They wield the powers of light and shadow, using the light to save allies and the shadows to cripple enemies. Rogue. The Rogue is a pure DPS class. A trickster and a scoundrel, the Rogue is a melee class that uses stealth, poisons, and assassination techniques to obliterate their enemies. Shaman. Shamans are a hybrid class, capable of serving as a healer or a DPS. While druids are allies of the nature in the wilds, shamans are more in tune with the primal elements of water, earth, fire, and air, bending them to their will and using them to heal their friends or destroy their enemies. Warlock. Warlocks are the final of the 4 pure DPS classes, using demons and shadow magic to deal the majority of their damage. Warlocks are less mobile than their mage counterpart, but they are sturdier and they deal high damage over time. Warrior. Warriors are a hybrid class, capable of playing either tank or DPS. They are one of the most classic archetypes in fantasy, using their physical brawn to overpower their foes. Death Knight. Death Knights are a hybrid class that can easily play either tank or DPS. Similar to Paladins, Death Knights are a melee class who use a combination of physical and shadow magic techniques to overwhelm their enemies. Demon Hunter. Demon Hunters are a hybrid class that can serve as either a tank or a DPS. They begin the game at level 98 and quest through a unique starting area. Demon Hunters use vicious melee techniques in combination with shadow and fel magic. Now I know this might seem like an overwhelming amount of information to process right now, but you really don't have to make the perfect choice on the first go. You can always go back, create a new character, a new class, and experiment with them. Now that we're a little bit more informed, it's time to make that choice for the first time and create our champion. Let's get to our next activity. It's time to make the final choice on your faction, race, and character class. This activity will take about 5 to 10 minutes, and when you're finished, you'll be ready to start your adventure on a champion of your own. We'll be making several key decisions as we create our character. Try not to overthink this activity, as you can always create fresh characters. Navigate to your chosen realm and hit the Create New Character button. You'll be presented with the Character Creation interface, where you can spend some time previewing various races and classes. You can see the additional options for racial customization by clicking on the Customize button. Here, you'll be able to edit appearances from a selection of pre-made options. Start by arranging your priorities. Do you want to play Alliance? Do you really want to play a Paladin? Is Troll the best looking race to you? Well, unfortunately, you can't play an Alliance Troll Paladin, so you're going to have to make a few choices here. Once you've decided on what faction, race, and class you'd like to play, spend some time customizing your character to make it your own. While some people aren't overly concerned with appearances, playing a character that you find awesome will definitely improve your time in the game. Choose a name for your character and hit finish. You'll be taken back to the realm screen. Hit enter world when you're ready, and you'll be shown the opening cinematic for your race.
As one of the remaining Blood Elves, you must fight to protect Quel'Thalas and help redeem the soul of your ancient people.
World of Warcraft released in 2004, and it's been one of the most popular and prolific games ever since. Even on its first release, the game set new standards for size and scope, containing a never-before-seen amount of adventures and content. In the last decade and a half, the game has received regular updates and many expansions, and is now an entirely unparalleled behemoth when it comes to magnitude. The reason I want to make this clear is because managing expectations with World of Warcraft is very important. It's a game that's meant to be played regularly. It was, and still is, designed to be an activity you can enjoy every single day, should you wish. A lot of your goals in the game will take a long time to accomplish. It's not a game of hours and days, it's a game of weeks and months. Don't be too intimidated. This doesn't necessarily mean you have to sink massive chunks of time in to accomplish anything. World of Warcraft has a lot of daily and weekly reset mechanics. Certain activities will only reward once within those time periods until the reset time rolls around. What I'm getting at is that it's important to take your time. There's plenty to keep you engaged, but don't expect to be an unstoppable force after your first week. Set long-term goals for yourself, but enjoy the journey you're taking to get there. Making some friends within the game will go a long way towards making that voyage a very special one. Let's head into Azeroth, adventurers, and start learning the basics of our hero. This section is all about learning the ropes, the fundamentals. That's why it's called the basics of your hero. We'll kick it off with some basic controls, figure out how to shoot off some spells, learn what our abilities are doing, before we kick it off with our first activity, where we'll sling some spells around and figure out exactly how to kill some monsters. Warcraft has a lot of ways of diversifying things from playstyle to gameplay and how we tackle our environments. Specializations and talents are two of the mechanics that are at the forefront of this diversification. And we're going to spend a lot of time going over how exactly to choose a specialization, what talents are, and how we can access both of them. Finally, we're going to touch on the items, the currency, and the economy within the game. I'm sure some of you already want to know where to get some of that slick-looking gear, and I'll break it down into blocks that you'll have no trouble assembling. Speaking of blocks, that's what this section is all about. Building blocks for your World of Warcraft experience. I actually fondly remember my early hours of the game, and I'm sure you will too. Let's jump into it. Before we start to explore the world, let's get some basic comfort with the controls. We'll go more in depth a little later, and we'll learn to customize and optimize the controls as needed. But for now, the fundamentals will suffice. The game will also offer some in-game tutorials you can either opt to read or ignore. Let's start with basic movement. By default, you can move your character by holding down the left and right mouse buttons simultaneously. Moving the mouse laterally will turn your character, while moving it forwards or backwards will tilt your point of view up and down. If you either press the left and mouse right button independently, you'll notice they have additional functions. Holding the left mouse button and moving the mouse will rotate the camera, but leave your character stationary, while holding down the right mouse button and moving the mouse will cause your character to change their facing, rotating in place without moving. The facing function is particularly important for spellcaster DPS, as you must be facing a target to cast spells. By using the right mouse button to change your facing while casting, you can make sure that a target stays always in your field of view. You can also move by using the keyboard. Q and E control lateral movement, allowing you to strafe side to side. W and S control forward and backward movement, although backpedaling using the S key comes at the penalty of reduced movement speed. The A and D keys allow you to rotate your character, albeit much more slowly than using the mouse. These movement keys can be used simultaneously with the mouse. For example, you can hold down the left mouse button to pan the camera around while you're moving. You can use your abilities by pressing the number keys. As you acquire new abilities by leveling up, you can drag and drop them onto the action bar. The abilities panel can be opened at any time by pressing P. Jumping can be done by pressing the spacebar. Game options and customer support can be accessed at any time by pressing Escape. As we took note of in the last video, you can open our spellbook by pressing P. If you're starting from scratch, you'll quickly unlock new spells and abilities as you level up. If you have used a character boost to reach max level, you should already have a full complement of abilities ready to go. There are 3 main types of abilities in World of Warcraft, and although there isn't really any official terminology, I like to call them fillers, nukes, and cooldowns. Fillers are your basic bread and butter abilities, doing exactly as the name would suggest. For most classes, your fillers will generate resources for your character that will allow you to unleash more powerful attacks or healing spells. Nukes are powerful abilities that deal increased amounts of damage or healing compared to your average filler spell. They often require special resources, cost increased amounts of your basic resource, or have temporary recharge periods. Cooldowns are abilities that have a long recharge or cooldown period and a large influence on character power. For DPS, cooldowns typically increase your character power for a brief period of time, allowing you to deal a large burst of damage. For healers, cooldowns allow you to do a large amount of healing to everyone at once or reduce the damage taken of an entire group of players. Tank cooldowns typically reduce the damage you take or allow you to dodge attacks reliably for a period of time. Let's use the Destruction Warlock specialization as an example. Destruction's main filler spell is Incinerate. Casting Incinerate generates Soul Shard fragments for the Warlock player. Once you have a full Soul Shard, the Warlock will be able to cast Chaos Bolt, the main nuke spell. Activating the Soul Harvest cooldown will increase the Warlock's damage by 20% for a period of time, further empowering the player's damage. Almost all classes in World of Warcraft have a similar type of interplay between their spells. I recommend using the website icyveins.com to find a guide specific to your class that will give you a basic idea of how spells should be used. For now, however, let's take a quick read through your available spells and we'll test them out in our next activity. Welcome back, adventurers. This activity will only take a couple of minutes, and it will help you achieve some basic comfort with the controls and your abilities. By the end of this activity, you should have some familiarity with the movement controls and be able to slay some standard enemies. To complete this exercise, we're going to follow these steps. To get started, practice using the movement controls we discussed in the basic controls section. Run around in circles, jump around like no one's watching, and practice using the mouse to move. Find a target dummy or enemy monster. If you've just created a level 1 character, there is typically a set of practice dummies next to the character creation area. If you've boosted a character, ask one of the guards in the city where to find the target dummies. Read through the available spells in your spellbook. Some spells and abilities don't deal damage or healing and instead have utility functions, like reducing the damage you take for several seconds or allowing you to move across a short distance instantly. Once you know what does what, drag and drop some spells onto your ability bar. Practice using the basic abilities on the target dummies or a nearby enemy monster. Spend a few minutes experimenting and build some familiarity and muscle memory. Once you're finished testing out some of your class's abilities, Feel free to try them out on any nearby enemies you can find. Getting the feeling for which spells offer the most potency will go a long way towards improving your comfort with the game. By now, you've probably heard me mention specializations a few times. It's time to take a look at some of the different specializations within World of Warcraft, what sets them apart, and how to make your own selection. Specializations are a way of further diversifying roles and playstyles. They're kind of like a class within a class. For example, a warrior player might choose to be a protection warrior, which is a tanking specialization. Protection warriors are the classic sword and board archetype, defending their allies with a shield in hand and drawing the enemy fire towards themselves. You can imagine how different the specialization feels than a warrior who has chosen the Fury specialization, which focuses on dual-wielding massive weapons and wreaking havoc on the battlefield. Specializations are often referred to players in the game as specs for short. If you're starting from level 1, you'll be assigned a default specialization when logging in for the first time. Once you've reached level 10, you'll be able to freely change your specialization should you wish to. If you've used a character boost, you'll be presented with the option at character creation. Either way, you don't have to worry too much about your choice, as specializations can be changed at any time, provided you're not in combat with an enemy. Specializations typically have entirely different sets of spells and abilities, although some classes have a handful that are shared between all of their specs. Every class has 3 specializations except the Druid, which offers 4, and the Demon Hunter, which has 2. Here's a full list of available specializations and their roles. I recommend trying out all of your chosen class's available specializations at some point, as they often have radically different playstyles. You might find that you fall in love with a spec that you didn't even take notice of at first. When making the choice for the first time, I recommend taking a look at your class's available specializations by pressing N. Don't think too hard, and choose a spec that suits the role you want to play with a theme that you find interesting. For my first character, I chose to play a Shadow Priest, but since then, I've had the pleasure of testing out every specialization in World of Warcraft. Other than a different set of basic abilities, one of the key distinctions between specializations is their talent trees, which we'll take a look at in the next video. Now that we're familiar with specializations, it's time to look at the talent trees that truly separate each spec from its sisters. Talents are special choices that further augment your specialization, and they can confer a wide variety of benefits, such as increased damage, new abilities, upgraded versions of your basic abilities, increased defensive capability, or added mobility. Each specialization has a unique talent tree, which has 7 rows and 3 columns. You may only have 1 talent per row, resulting in 7 talents at maximum level. You unlock new talents at certain milestones, which are based off your character's level. Death Knights and Demon Hunters have different milestones for unlocking their talents, as they start the game at level 55 and level 98 respectively. You can select your talents, or view the unlocking milestones by pressing the N key on your keyboard. You must have chosen a specialization already to select talents. You may change talents at any time, free of charge, while you are inside a rest area, which basically means a city or a town within the game. You may change talents anywhere, providing you are not in combat, by using a Tome of the Clear Mind or a Tome of the Tranquil Mind, depending on your character level. Talents provide the choice for your character to develop a more specialized playstyle, allowing you to adapt to any situation. For example, you may choose to select talents that give you access to more cooldowns, allowing you to perform greater bursts of damage or healing. Alternately, you may instead choose talents that improve your ability to deal with multiple enemies simultaneously. There are quite an amount of permutations. Talents provide a means of adding additional variety to specializations, allowing you to make modifications to your playstyle based on the situation at hand or your personal preference. Many websites offer recommendations for which talents to take. I recommend using icyveins.com, as it provides the highest quality specialization guides available. In our next section, we'll experiment with talents using an online tool. We're going to check out some talent trees in this activity to give us a better idea of all the options out there. This is easiest done through a third-party tool, which I'll use during the activity to demonstrate. We're going to use wowhead.com. This will only take you a couple of minutes, but by the end of the activity, you should have a much more concrete idea of how the talent systems work and how they differentiate specializations from each other. To complete the activity, let's follow these steps. Head to wowhead.com, navigate to Tools, then hover over Talent Calculator and choose from the list of specializations. Read through some of the various talents for the specializations you've chosen. Take a look through the other specializations your class has. You never know what kind of interesting and unique talents you might find to pique your interest. Talents can give us an idea of how a specific playstyle can develop, or what specializations may be appealing to us in the future. By now, you should have a much clearer understanding of what talents are, and how they can influence gameplay. One of the most integral parts of the World of Warcraft are the items available within. Killing monsters will always result in items being dropped, which can be looted by the player. Looted items will be placed in your inventory, which can be opened by pressing B or Shift B. You'll know a fallen foe has loot to be acquired when they have a sparkly glow surrounding their corpse. Mousing over a lootable enemy will transform your cursor into a loot bag, and simply right-clicking will allow you to take the items for yourself. Nearly all items can be sold to non-player vendors by interacting with them and right-clicking on the item. Some items within the game have no purpose other than to be sold for vendors, and these are common drops from standard enemies. Players call such items junk, although they should still be looted for the profit opportunities they present. Many of the game's items can be worn by your character. One of the most satisfying parts of World of Warcraft is equipping your champion with some seriously powerful items. Items that can be worn by the player are referred to in-game as gear. Gear can be equipped by right-clicking on it when it is in your bags, or by dragging them onto the matching slot in the character pane, which can be opened by pressing the C key. Here are the available gear slots in World of Warcraft. You may only equip one of each type of gear and armor, except for trinkets and rings, which you may have two of. Weapons are a unique case that vary based on your specialization. There are many types of weapons in the game, but they can be broken down into two main types: one-handed weapons and two-handed weapons. Characters that use two-handed weapons have both their weapon slots filled, preventing them from using any other weapons. The exception to this rule is the Fury Warrior specialization, which allows the player to wield a two-handed weapon in either hand. One-handed weapons are a bit more diverse, and the rules depend on the class and the specialization. Some classes, like rogues, will dual-wield one-handed weapons, for example, daggers. Many tank classes will wield a one-handed weapon and a shield, while many magic users will use a one-handed weapon and an offhand item, which is essentially a shield without defensive benefit. For example, an arcane book type of item that your character holds and gains extra power from. Your gear helps determine the power level of your character, and higher quality gear will boost your character's survivability and power level. Most high quality gear can only be obtained from the game's more difficult activities, such as a dungeon or a raid, but we'll talk more about those later on in the course. There are several types of armor in World of Warcraft, but your character may only equip pieces of gear that correspond to your class's armor type. The armor types are plate, mail, leather, and cloth. Some classes may equip multiple types of armor. However, there is a bonus for equipping the type of gear that matches your class's inherent theme. Cloth armor should be used by warlocks, mages, and priests. Leather armor should be used by druids, rogues, demon hunters, and monks. Mail armor is worn by hunters and shamans. Plate armor is used by death knights, warriors, and paladins. These restrictions only apply to gear that is classified as armor. Rings, amulets, and trinkets are considered jewelry and may be used by any class, although trinkets are often designed with certain classes in mind. Capes do not have any specific armor type, but often come with stats that determine which classes will find them desirable. Due to the greatly increased effectiveness of equipping the correct type of armor, you should proceed as if your class can only use the type of armor that I mentioned. Other items cannot be equipped, and are instead used for other parts of the game. For example, many items are used as reagents in the profession and crafting system. Such items can be sold to other players for good profit. There is no set means of identifying the purpose of items that can't be equipped without using third-party add-ons, but you will quickly learn what items can be easily traded with other players. For example, the many types of cloth that drop within the game. There are several tiers of quality available in World of Warcraft, and they can easily be identified by the color of their tooltip. The quality system is most relevant for items that can be equipped as gear. Poor quality items have a gray tooltip, and they are considered junk. These items should never be equipped and should always be sold to the in-game vendors for profit. Common quality items have a white tooltip, but these are also considered junk items by players, and they should also be sold to the vendors for profit. Uncommon quality items have a green tooltip, and are often called green items or simply greens by players. Despite the name, they are the most common rewards from quests, and they drop often from monsters out in the world. Uncommon quality items are also often produced by the in-game professions. This is the lowest quality of item that you should ever equip on your character unless you are lower than level 10. Green items will likely constitute the majority of your gear until you reach maximum level. Rare quality items have a blue tooltip, and are often called rares or simply blues by players. The most common place to find rare quality items is from dungeon bosses, which are guaranteed to drop at least one blue item per kill. Rare quality items are typically unique to the boss that drops them, meaning that you can only obtain that specific item from that specific boss. Epic quality items have a purple tooltip. While these items are extremely uncommon while leveling, they are widely available at maximum level. The most common place to obtain epic items is from raids, which are more difficult versions of dungeons. Epic items are nearly always unique, meaning that you can only obtain specific items from their matching bosses. For example, the Convergence of Fates item shown on screen can only be obtained from the boss Grand Magistrix Elisande. Legendary quality items have orange tooltips. Legendary gear is extremely uncommon and can be only obtained under extremely specific circumstances. In the Legion expansion, legendary items were available as a random drop when doing maximum level content, and a maximum of 2 legendaries could be worn at any time. Prior to Legion, there were only a handful of legendary items available in the game, and they were released as special questlines or ultra-rare drops once every few years. Artifact quality items have a light gold or yellow tooltip and are currently only available in the Legion expansion. All players receive an artifact weapon upon beginning the Legion expansion, at around level 100. Artifacts can only be upgraded using a special item called relics, further increasing their power. The game lore defines artifacts as objects of tremendous power and historical significance within the game. But since all players are guaranteed their own artifact, this quality level of loot isn't really considered to be rare or special. Heirloom quality items have a cyan tooltip. Heirlooms are special items that can be bought from vendors for gold, and they grant experience bonuses when worn. These are typically obtained by players who already have a maximum level character and they want to expedite the leveling process for additional characters they intend to create. Heirlooms are also a special quality of loot, as they serve no purpose in the endgame and exist purely to bolster quality of life while leveling. As we noted earlier, all items are stored in your inventory by default, which can be opened by B or Shift B. The exception is heirlooms, which are stored in their own special tab and are shared across all characters in your account, which can be opened by pressing Shift P. Your inventory is made up of items called bags, which are themselves items. Your bags can be upgraded and replaced to provide you with significantly increased storage space. Bags can be purchased from other players who make them using the tailoring profession, or obtained through specific quest rewards. There is also a special class of item, which are common quality that players call consumables. Consumables provide a temporary increase in power, heal their character, or restore mana over time. Consumables vary widely in price and effect and are obtained from a multitude of sources. As the name implies, right-clicking on a consumable consumes the item and confers its benefits to the user. Despite what you may think, quality is not the most important metric when it comes to measuring the worth or power of a piece of gear. All gear comes labeled with an item level. The item level of a piece of gear is directly tied to the level of the enemies that dropped the gear, or to the difficulty of the challenge you faced. Therefore, an epic quality item acquired at level 80 will be significantly worse than an uncommon quality item acquired at level 90. In our next section, we'll take a deeper look at gear and why it has such a potent influence over our character's power level. Although we talked about the significant influence gear has on your character's power level, we didn't really talk about why. All characters in World of Warcraft have attributes, which can be seen in the character statistics pane by pressing C. Nearly all players refer to attributes as stats. Gear comes loaded with all different types of stats, which we can separate into two main types: primary stats and secondary stats. Primary stats are related directly to your specialization and armor type. The four primary stats are stamina, strength, agility, and intellect. Stamina is shared by all armor types, and is the main factor that influences your character's health pool. Strength increases the attack power of plate-wearing DPS and tanks, as well as granting additional parry chance for these classes. Agility increases the melee and ranged attack power of mail and leather DPS as well as tanks, and grants additional dodge chance to these classes. Intellect increases the spell power of cloth-wearing DPS as well as the spell power of plate, leather, and mail-wearing healing classes. If you follow the armor types we recommend for your class in the previous section, you will never have to worry about primary stats, as they will always be correct for your class. For example, even if you are a Holy Paladin, which is a healing specialization, you will still always use plate gear. The game will automatically detect your specialization and switch the strength on the plate over to intellect. If you decided to switch your specialization to retribution or protection while wearing plate, which both use strength as their primary stat, your plate gear would automatically update to match. This ensures that hybrid classes with a healing specialization never have to use multiple sets of armor. Now, let's take a look at the secondary stats available within World of Warcraft. Secondary stats offer a much higher degree of influence and customization over how your character deals damage and healing. While primary stats offer a linear and stable increase in health and attack power, secondary stats can scale exponentially, generate additional resources for your class, and much more. The four main secondary stats are versatility, haste, critical strike, and mastery. Versatility increases the damage, healing, and absorbs your character does, and reduces the damage you take by half that percentage. Haste increases the attack speed and cast speed of your character and any pets that you have. Additionally, haste increases the tick rate of any damage over time effects, increases the regeneration rate of some resources, and reduces the recharge rate of certain abilities. In special cases, haste also reduces the global cooldown for certain abilities. Critical strike increases the chance for your abilities and pets to critically strike, which causes them to deal double their normal damage or healing. Mastery is a unique secondary stat. Every specialization has a different mastery, and they all have differing benefits. For example, the Fire Mage mastery is called Ignite, and it causes your primary fire spells to also apply a burning effect to targets that increases in potency based on the amount of mastery rating that you have. It is important to understand that the best secondary stats vary depending on your specialization. Haste can be very valuable for certain classes, especially if their attacks or spells have the chance to generate resources. For some specs, however, haste may have little to no value at all. You should consult a guide from icyveins.com to ensure you are prioritizing the correct stats for your specialization. There are additional kinds of attributes available in World of Warcraft, and we'll discuss those now. These stats are far less impactful than primary and secondary stats, and they usually go hand in hand with an item level. Armor reduces physical damage taken from single target attacks. Durability reduces each time you die, or slowly over time in combat. Once durability reaches 0, your gear will turn red and will be treated as if it were not equipped until you repair it at a vendor. Weapon damage determines how large your hits will be with each attack, while weapon speed determines the rate at which you attack. Weapons with high damage typically have a low weapon speed. Please keep in mind that weapon speed and weapon damage are only relevant statistics for classes that deal physical damage. Spell power and attack power are functionally the same as intellect, agility, and strength for their respective classes. The key difference is that these stats provide no defensive benefit and don't scale with % of intellect, agility, or strength modifiers. Spell power and attack power are found nearly exclusively on weapons. Finally, we have tertiary stats. You can think of tertiary stats basically as bonus stats. Every so often, when a piece of gear drops, it has a chance to be upgraded with a tertiary stat, which provides little to no combat benefit. Instead, these stats mostly center around quality of life. There are 4 tertiary stats. Leech causes your character to heal for a percentage of damage or healing dealt. Indestructible causes the item to never lose durability. Speed grants a minor increase to character movement speed. Avoidance reduces all area damage by a percentage. Area damage means attacks that aren't targeted directly on you. If this is a little too much information to process all at once, the only stats that really matter are the secondary stats. As long as you're using armor that matches your gear type, you'll automatically get the primary stat that you need. Typically, gear only ever has 2 secondary stats per item. There are exceptions to this rule, but most of them are legendary items. The ramifications of this fact is that certain gear may not be useful for you if it doesn't have the stats that are desirable for your specialization. The weighting of stats on gear is also quite variable. For example, a piece of gear with mastery and haste may be heavily skewed towards mastery. Say, it has 900 mastery and 300 haste. If haste is your best stat and mastery the next best, it still might be better for your character to use a similar piece of gear with a heavy haste rating. Say 700 haste and 450 critical strike. This can usually be determined by using a guide or a tool called Simulation Craft. Many realms in World of Warcraft sport robust and unique economies, but fortunately, the currency model is a relatively simple one. Gold is the main unit of currency in World of Warcraft. 1 gold piece is the equivalent of 100 silver pieces, and 1 silver piece is worth 100 copper pieces. Although this information is purely academic, you will never hear any player mention silver or copper, as gold is not difficult to come by. Gold has a variety of uses in World of Warcraft. For instance, gold is necessary to repair your gear, which must be done relatively frequently. It is also the main unit of currency when trading with other players in the game. Many non-player vendors also sell useful items for gold pieces. Earning enough gold to cover your repair costs is not difficult. Humanoid enemies will drop money, which accumulates over time. Picking up the gray and white gear, which we learned earlier is called junk, and selling it to vendors is also a great way of supplementing your income. Quests and other activities will also reward gold. There are many other currencies in Azeroth, which will be tracked in your currency tab. The currency tab can be opened by pressing C and then tabbing to the currency window at the bottom. These unique currencies are typically used for trading with in-game factions, and are earned by completing objectives for them and building reputation. The most important use for gold in-game is for using the auction house, an in-game system that allows you to post items for a set price and purchase other players' items should you need them. We'll get more in depth on the auction house later in the course.